Hello, everyone, and welcome to the June RELO Andes webinar. I'm Rachel Martin. I'm so glad you're here this month. Whether you're watching us live or you found this video a bit later, I want to welcome you. So this month, we're going to be talking about cheating and plagiarism and academic dishonesty. It's a bit of a difficult topic, but before we jump into the webinar, I want to make sure and just share a couple of announcements here. You've probably already found, and hopefully you like, the RELO Andes Facebook page. This is where we broadcast live. And since you're here, go ahead and mark your calendars for next month. That's going to be on July 15th. Another thing I would like to just give you a little preview about, RELO Andes is going to be sponsoring another online English Teachers Conference. We'll have details about that coming soon. Maybe you remember last year we held it in October, the Re-Evolution Conference. Well, very, very soon we are going to be putting out the call for proposals. So I want you to be thinking about what has worked in your classroom this year. We're going to have a strand specifically dedicated to teachers sharing what has worked, sharing their success stories. I would like you all to apply to send your proposals once we announce that. And last little announcement, I don't usually do this many, but if you are working with the Aprendo en Casa materials in Peru, we have a series of videos on YouTube that are specifically for English teachers to help you work with those materials. So it's the English Teachers Break Room, and we'll make sure we share the link. All right, I'm looking at the chat here, and we have a lot of people saying hi. We have Yolanda from Bolivia. We have Karen joining us. Cece from Lima. We have Matilde here. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. Please keep introducing yourself in the chat. And we're going to use the chat quite a bit today. So anytime you see this logo right here with the question mark on the sticky note, that means I'm asking you a question. So please answer the question in the chat. And since we're talking about a little bit of a sensitive topic, make sure you don't share your students' names or anything too embarrassing there. But let me ask my first question of the morning or the afternoon. I guess it's afternoon for most of us. Do you think cheating is a common problem right now? Thinking of your current classes, are none of your students cheating? Half of them, almost everyone? I'd really like to hear what you're thinking, what you're seeing here in the chat. And as you are answering, let me share some headlines, some news articles, because this topic of academic dishonesty, of plagiarism, it's been in the news a lot recently. So I'm going to show you here. Here's an article that I think kind of put it into everyone's mind back in January. Forbes did a big profile. It's talking about students cheating their way through COVID. It was a pretty big headline, very shocking. Or there's this one more recently, which was from Vice. The headline was, "I get paid to do homework for students all around the world." Of course, by this point, it isn't just these big profile articles talking about it. Universities all over the world I have articles here from New Zealand, from North Carolina. They're reporting that there are more cases being reported, that more students are using unethical means to get their grades. I do think it is very important to realize, though, or to acknowledge that not every allegation of cheating turns out to be true. There was recently a really big scandal with Dartmouth Medical School, where they ended up actually dropping the allegations. So there's a lot of things happening. It's very much in the news. And as I look at the chat here, it seems like most people are answering around 50%. So around half your students is what I'm kind of seeing here, maybe a little under half. So it's prevalent. We know this. I mean, it's in the news, it's in your experiences. But as I was starting to prepare this webinar, and as I was talking to so many teachers about this, the question kept coming up, is this really happening more because we are online right now? Cheating, academic plagiarism, dishonesty has always occurred. Well, I found some research on this topic. So coming from Missouri State University, there's a couple of professors who have been researching this for the last decade, they've been comparing, do you get higher rates of cheating when you have an online class versus in person? And it's really interesting because when they studied this back in 2010, there was no significant difference between the two. However, and their research is ongoing, but now in our current, pandemic teaching, everything got moved online. They did find a higher rate of students claiming to cheat, students saying that they were cheating more now online than they had been in face-to-face classes. It is important to note that based on their research, most students still are not cheating. They're going through their classes honestly. But I want to ask a question here, and this might seem like a little bit of an odd question, but when you hear this, I mean, you know it in your practice, but as I show you some of these statistics, some of these articles, how does it make you feel as a teacher to know that quite a few students are cheating in their classes? I'm going to share some quotes with you here that are from teachers I know, not sharing their names, of course, but these are some real quotes here. So some teachers have told me, I just found out that my top student has cheated on all of their exams. I thought she cared about my class. That teacher was really upset. Another teacher was saying, they passed around the answers on WhatsApp or on Discord. Discord's a really popular server that students are using, at least in the US. And the teacher says, I can't stop it. There's nothing I can do about this. They feel kind of powerless. And this last quote here, I think is really representative of how some teachers are feeling right now. Why am I working so hard to create new material? They pay someone else to do their homework. So if you maybe are experiencing any of this frustration, I want to mention that this is a really valid thing, and this I think is a really difficult thing right now. So student cheating is toxic for teachers who are already working so hard. I think it's important when you're a teacher that, you can like your students, that you have a positive feeling about them, you have a positive impression of them. But when you start encountering a lot of student cheating or plagiarism, sometimes that can really discourage teachers. And I've seen some teachers becoming almost burnt out or bitter about this. So my first piece of advice to you, and this is probably the hardest piece of advice I'll give all through this webinar, is to try not to take student cheating personally. According to the research, like looking at that study I was talking about earlier, they say students cheat to meet a need. So they're doing this for a reason that isn't really connected with the teacher, even though it can feel so personal to us. And I want to ask you, what do you think are some of the reasons that students cheat? So again, let's put this in the chat if you're watching me live, or if you're watching it later, you can still add it in the chat, or just think to yourself, what are some of those motivations? Why are students cheating in classes? And as I'm looking here at the chat, yeah, I agree that it is really upsetting to experience that. Some people are already starting to give us some advice here in the chat. That's awesome. Well, let's look at what some of the reasons when they survey students and when they work with students, especially ones who get caught, what are some of the reasons they give? Well, students cheat first and foremost out of a desire to get a good grade. They cheat for fear of failing, or because of procrastination and poor time management. These are like the top three that come up. And it makes sense if these behaviors are how they achieve a goal. Well, the goal is the good grade, or they're really not sure how to cope with their workload. Some of the other reasons here are disinterest in the assignment, a belief that they're not going to get caught anyway, or sometimes there can be a confusion about what constitutes plagiarism or current university policies. And I'm drawing all of these from research here from a technical institute, and I've shared their link on the bottom. But when we talk about confusion, that's usually about writing assignments. And sometimes students don't actually know if they need to put something in quotation marks or if they need to cite it. Sometimes there can be an education factor there where we have to explain to them what to do. Yeah, Edison just said it really well there, is that they're prioritizing the grades over learning. Exactly. And there can be many reasons why students are doing that. But I think that is what it comes down to in a lot of cases. I want to highlight here in the chat, Ceci said that they don't have time to study. And I think that's big, talking about time management. Jessica mentioned because they're doing other things. Exactly. So some of these are things that, maybe we can help them with their study skills. Sometimes there can be some proactive things in there. But let me move into asking you for your best advice. What can teachers do to stop or prevent cheating? So let's think big picture. What are both some really big strategies and what are some concrete things that we can do maybe in any assignment or any test? There's a real range of things. And I'm looking here in the chat for those of you that are live. I think if we're going to look at solutions, we need to also look at how students are cheating. So we talked about why, and it's, they're afraid of failing. They don't have the time or they don't have the interest. How are they doing it? Well, these things are pretty much the same as what they were before distance learning as far as they're sharing tests and they're sharing answers, but they can do it much more efficiently. I think there's been a lot of, private WhatsApp groups. If you know the server Discord is mostly for gamers and for teams to work together. But students can set up a group and share things there. Some students are having someone else do their work. Or because we are language teachers, we have to talk about translation websites too. What's really changed is just how easy this has been because, they're no longer having to hide their phone somewhere. They can do it in the privacy of their own home. So what are some of the specific steps that we can take? Well, let's go through these. If students are sharing tests or answers, we need to mix up the tests and the answers. So if you're working with a learning management system, many of them will let you create, if you're creating a quiz or an exam, or even just an assignment, a lot of those programs will let you create a question bank that has more questions than your students will actually be shown. So say you want them to answer 10 questions. What you do in your learning management system, and I'm teaching on Moodle right now. I'm doing some classes in Moodle, so I can do this on there. I put in 20 questions instead of 10. And then I click on two things. I click on randomize so that the questions that the students get, they get 10 out of my 20, but I don't know which ones they're going to be in advance. They don't know which ones they're going to be in advance. And I also, if it's something that has multiple choice or has answers that they can select, I make sure I click randomize on the answers as well. It just makes it, a little bit harder to share and compare if you're not seeing exactly the same quiz. And most of the learning management systems are set up so that if you do this, even if you aren't doubling your questions, just add, 5 or 10 extra ones in there. Someone mentioned in the chat that Socrative has it too. I'm pretty sure all of the major learning management systems have it at this point. But just take advantage of that. Add 5 extra questions, add 10 extra questions, and it makes it a little bit more difficult. If it's inconvenient to pass the information around, it will discourage it. Another thing that you can do when you're thinking about writing assignments, and I said tests on here, I probably could have said assignments, but tests or assignments, if you create a new one each term, so you have a new one each year or each month, depending on how often you repeat your class, keep the questions similar. If they're really, really different, then people will notice immediately if they're using the wrong set of answers that they borrowed from someone who took the class last semester. So in this way, you actually want to be a little bit tricky. And I think it's okay to be strategic with this because you're not trying to trick any of your students who are taking the exam correctly. You're writing good quality questions. But if you keep the same sentence, you keep the first sentence the same as you write a new version of the exam, if you only change a couple of words, or maybe you add the word not, something small that changes the question just a little bit, then you're going to notice, you as the teacher are going to know if someone's using an old answer key. But it might not be as obvious to a student who is looking to cheat on it. Another step, and this has become really important in the last year, I would say. There are quite a few websites, and I'm not going to give you the names for them. You can Google and find them, but there are quite a few websites out there where students, especially at the university level, can post questions. And then either by paying a subscription or sometimes just for free, they can see how other students have answered questions for a class. So as teachers, sometimes it's a good idea to just search for your own material. Use Google or use one of these websites and put some of your questions into the search engine. Put quotes around them. Put quotes around the part, what we call them statistically improbable phrases. So a statistically improbable phrase is something that is unique to that question. But you just put part of your question in a quote, search for it, and see if there's any answers floating around out there. You can pretend that you are a student trying to do it and just see what you can find. Sometimes it's surprising. Now, one of the best changes, and I was seeing this in the chat over here earlier, and this can be a little bit hard, but when it is possible, making a shift toward student work, student answers that they produce themselves. If the students are constructing their own response, if they're writing something, speaking something, recording something, it's harder for them to all copy. This, is in contrast to fill in the blank or multiple choice where you get the answers, you can just put them down. When the students have to produce something and be creative, it can force them to do their own work a bit. Now, of course, there's ways that students can get around this, especially if they're paying someone to do their work. But when we move toward a more authentic type of questions, of tasks, that's good for language learning anyway. So I say this is a bit tricky because it can add to grading time. So I think you always have to have a balance depending on how many students you have. Some things that are self-grading, some things you need to look at with a rubric. But having students really produce their own work can go a long ways to cutting down on the cheating. Another thing I want to mention, and I think this is so important because sometimes we almost forget about this as teachers, and I know I've been guilty about this. Sometimes we forget to tell students which resources they can use. So not every assignment has the same restrictions. I was thinking about this. So I can write in a couple different languages. And if I'm sending emails to someone, I always run them through a spell checker. It doesn't matter if it's English, if it's Spanish, if it's whatever. If it's a professional email, I'm spell checking it, of course, in my professional life. Now, if I was taking a class, that might be a form of cheating. Maybe I'm not supposed to be checking, grammar and spelling on an assignment. It really depends on the context. So make sure your students know what is allowed. Sometimes you're going to have them collaborating. I hope you're having them collaborating a lot. I love collaborative learning, and I think we can even do it online. It takes a little bit more planning, but you can have students work together to create things. Well, they need to know, is this an assignment that I can have my friend proofread for me? And that's encouraged. Or would that be a form of academic dishonesty? I think the saddest cases, and some of the ones that frustrate teachers the most, at least, in the teacher groups that I am in, is when you give an open book test and then students still cheat on it or plagiarize on it. Giving open book tests can be a great measure of learning sometimes. So an open book test is, when they have maybe a certain amount of time to complete a task, an assignment, and they're allowed to use all their notes, the textbook, it's open. This can be a really good thing. But students need to know when that's okay. Finally, be very clear about your citation policy. I mentioned this earlier. I think the place where actual genuine accidents in plagiarism happen is a lot with writing, because students get the idea, I'm supposed to write about this. Maybe if you are teaching English for specific purposes and your students need to write something about their discipline, their science topic, or their business topic, something like that. Well, they've gone and they found an expert, they want to quote it. They need to have some guidelines. They need to know how much they can quote in their paper or how to rephrase that to give the proper credit. So make sure that's clear. That's something that not every student knows. If you have students who might be interested in studying in the United States in the future, that is really, really important, because academic plagiarism, dishonesty is taken super seriously by U.S. universities. So you want to make sure that they really understand how to give credit to ideas that come from someone else and how to put their own ideas and analysis into their papers. Let's see. Oh, I love this point here. I want to highlight what Matilde said in the chat. We have to be sure that our students are cheating, or are they using their own strategies? That's a good thing to think about there. Like, where is that line? And it depends on the assignment, I think. I think you have to make that really clear, because otherwise they're just using the tools at their disposal sometimes. Sometimes, yeah. And we want our students to be problem solvers. We want them to be able to use the language in the real world. I'm not encouraging cheating, but in the real world, you're going to use models of language. You don't copy it and pass it off as your own, but it's a little bit different than it is in an academic setting. Well, let's keep going here. Kind of in that bigger picture thinking, it's worth considering what grades actually grade. Now, I am not saying that grades cause cheating. Absolutely not. However, when grading systems really emphasize lower level skills, it may be easy for students to, we call it gaming the system. Gaming the system is where you figure out how to win, not the correct way. Gaming the system is kind of like cheating because you found a loophole, or you found a way to exploit a system that wasn't intended. So it's always worth taking a look at what is really being measured in a class and, prioritizing the authentic learning and the authentic use of English. So I'm going to ask you another question here, and the writing's just a little small on the slide here. So I'm going to read it to you here. I'm asking, which of the following are cheating? So I'm going to give you 4 things here, and I'd like you to answer in the chat, which of these do you consider cheating? So number 1, giving a friend a copy of last semester's final exam without the answers. Number 2, having your mother proofread your essay. My mom is brilliant. I'm lucky when she can proofread my writing. Number 3, using spell check. Or number 4, looking up answers online and quoting them. So which one of those do you consider cheating? All of them? Some of them? Does it depend on the assignment? I think you know what my answer is going to be. I'm going to say, for some of these, it depends on the assignment. That first one, so A, giving a friend a copy, that's academic dishonesty. But none of our students, or very few of our students, often realize that if you're the one giving the answers, you are cheating just as much as being the person who accepts them. So sometimes we have to have that conversation there. Having your mother proofread your essay, it depends on the assignment. A lot of times, I encourage students, have 2 people proofread that. That can be a great practice. Or if it's something that was only supposed to be their work, not a great idea. Using spell check. Again, most of the time, I assume my students are using it, and that's okay. And for the last one there, lots of people in the chat were saying D felt like cheating to them, looking up answers online and quoting them. Oh, that's a good question there, Matilde. Are they looking them up before or after? Looking them up before could be good studying. I think the main point on that one is if they're quoting them word for word, are they giving credit? Like, are they saying, this is an answer I found here? Or are they saying, this is my idea? So I put these up here just to kind of spark a conversation about the different types of activities that may or may not be cheating, may or may not be academic dishonesty. And I feel like this is a good conversation to have with students. Oh, okay. So I'm seeing a comment here about if you get last semester's exam, doesn't mean it's the same one as next semester's. That's a good point. I think it depends on what you've put in the syllabus or what the expectation is. Can you share that forward? Good point. All right. So kind of my closing thought here, I want to talk about having conversations with students about cheating. And sometimes I think teachers shy away from this because they're worried that they're going to give students the idea. You're not going to give students the idea. All the ideas are out there, and there are increasingly sophisticated ways that students find their own workarounds. Bringing this up is not going to start a problem. I recommend you actually have a discussion, especially if you have intermediate or above students, so you can have a really good discussion about this. Talk about academic dishonesty, academic honesty, plagiarism, cheating. It might give you some insight into what your students think is acceptable or what they think is not acceptable. And it also lets them know that you're paying attention to this. I would recommend you need to be clear before you have this conversation in class that anything they reveal will be acted on. You don't want to leave students feeling tricked that you were encouraging them to discuss this openly and then 3 students get kicked out of school. So I would be very clear ethically that you're having this discussion not to point fingers at anyone in the class at that moment. This isn't the same as investigating an allegation. They can practice their third person. I've heard of people doing this if they need to. So here are some questions that might spark some great discussions with students. You could pose, why do students cheat at school? See if they give some of the same answers that we started with in this webinar. It could be really interesting to hear what they say. Do many students cheat at school, or is it rare? Again, it would be really interesting to hear what your students say. I've held this conversation. I've had it with different groups in the past, and depending on the group, I get very different answers. If you have a group that could be open to a little bit of discussion, is it ever acceptable to cheat at school? Or another kind of philosophical one, is academic dishonesty a victimless crime? Now, when I say victimless crime, what that means is, oh, nobody gets hurt. Sure, it's wrong, but nobody gets hurt. I think you can really argue against that. But if you're going to bring this up with students, let them argue it out. Don't be so quick to say, absolutely, it is a problem because it creates unrealistic expectations and it elevates some students at the expense of others. Let them really have a discussion there. Or something else you could do is use that activity that I gave you a few moments ago where I was asking you, which of these 4 are cheating? Use that activity with students. Or share an article on this topic and discuss it. There is so much being written about it in the English language media right now. I'm sure you can find one that really goes along with your students' level, that would speak to them and that can facilitate this conversation. So in conclusion, I just want to go through my main points here. Cheating impacts teachers as well as students. Students cheat to meet a need. Teachers can take specific actions that are designed to disrupt common cheating strategies. We went through a whole list of these. I'm sure maybe you can even think of more. Once we know how students are getting their hands on this information, we can disrupt it. Grading systems do not cause cheating, but they can be developed to measure learning in other ways. So you can make them harder to cheat with, or you can make them put the focus in a different way. And lastly, talking to students about cheating will not encourage them to do it. It's a good proactive strategy to adopt. All right, well, I want to thank everyone for joining me here. If you were watching live or if you're watching in like the first 24 hours, I also want to invite you to join me tomorrow. on Friday, June 18th at 2 p.m. Lima time. We hold a discussion group every month and we talk a bit about our topic here. We usually have teachers from a couple different countries. We just have a good conversation. So if you'd like to join me, check the RELO Andes Facebook page for the sign up link. And I look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. All right, take care, everyone.